In this video, sponsored by Revenant's Run, the line of one-page rules-compatible sci-fi miniatures, I'm going to give you 2 things you shouldn't do and 1 that you should to make your vehicles better and faster to paint. I generally play skirmish games, and generally skirmish games don't have too many vehicles. It's just kind of how those types of games work. Army-sized games are usually where you find the vehicles in miniatures wargaming. That said, I've painted my fair share of vehicles in the past, and I'm going to be building a 1,000-point Imperial Guard army for 10th edition 40k, so I'll be back to painting some vehicles again quite soon. And it got me thinking about the things that we do in vehicle painting in this hobby that slow us down. Things we don't really need to do. So I'll start with a thing that you should do, because that's how I seem to roll. Something that many people seem to neglect, actually. Use a simple Zenithal highlight on your vehicles. You've probably heard about Zenithals before. It's kind of painting a lighter paint over a darker paint. The darker paint is usually the primer, and then doing that lighter paint from above. This is to simulate the light hitting the model from above, which is usually where light hits us from, whether we're, outside or inside, unless you have something kind of weird like this. If you've heard of slap chop, then you know what I'm talking about, that white over black, and then we start with the transparent speed paints and such. However, that lighter color doesn't have to be white, and it doesn't have to be over black necessarily either. The reason you use a Zenithal technique on vehicles at the beginning stages is to bring out the detail. If you just paint the vehicle blue, for example, whether with a spray can or an airbrush or even using a regular brush, then everything will just be the same color. But vehicles can have tons and tons of details and panels and little greeblies and doodads and all over, especially in sci-fi these days, obviously. And to really pop those details out quickly and easily, it's actually quite easy. Start with a dark color. Here on this 3D print from Revenant's Run, I started with black primer, but you can start with a color primer if you wanted to, and then put like a lighter highlight color over the top of that. It totally depends on the color scheme that you're going for. I then did a very simple Zenithal of Army Painter Dark Sky airbrush paint over the black with my airbrush. But you could use a rattle can or even a big like dry brush / makeup brush to apply that second color. It's up to you. And then, just because I'm a fancy lad, I also did another highlight just in some certain spots with Twilight Sky airbrush paint, also from Army Painter. It doesn't matter. What really matters is the effect that it's giving you. That whole kind of lighter color sprayed down over the darker color thing, it does something really important. It adds what I call micro shadows all over the vehicle. If you got the dark color into all the nooks and the crannies all over the vehicle, and you should have, that's the whole point of primer, but definitely in this situation, it makes a lot of sense to get it everywhere, all the undercuts and everything. Then spraying the lighter color from above, but not directly down from above, kind of at an angle, right? It's like, think about kind of doing a cone. It's like a 45-degree angle, and you kind of go all the way around the model a little bit, and then it gets on all the top parts, but it doesn't get into the undercuts. That will really pop out all those little micro shadows from all the little tiny detail pieces on your vehicle. Using a dry brush will work mostly the same as well, as long as if you brush from the top to bottom, right? You got to do it that way and not from bottom to top, because that'll put the lighter paint on the underside of things and it will look like it's lit from underneath. Just that one simple trick at the beginning of your vehicle painting will really help. Once you have that part done, then here's a thing that you shouldn't do. Don't go crazy with the colors, right? Like, vehicle models these days have tons and tons of detail, like I mentioned, and that can be very, very daunting if you think that you have to paint every detail again after you're done doing the priming and the base coating. Oh, I gotta paint this a different color and then this a different color. Actually, you don't, right? Generally, vehicles are kind of all the same color, especially military vehicles. They're pretty much all the same color, minus a few pieces here and there. And so that can be to your benefit. Sometimes you need to paint metal things that shouldn't ever be painted in the real world. They shouldn't have paint on them. They need to be, unpainted. Steel, hydraulic piston-y type things, certain joints. it's kind of really up to you. Go look at any piece of construction equipment out there, like those big backhoe things, and look which parts are painted and which aren't, and which are covered in grime, which we'll get to in a bit. You'll go through, and hit all those parts, the parts that need to be silver with some kind of metallic silver, probably, you could maybe paint the canopy or the windshield, depending on the vehicle, depending on what kind it has. If it's got a clear one, you could keep it clear, but if it's a 3D print, it probably doesn't have a clear one. So paint it a cool color. Today's fighter jets, like the F-22 Raptor, for example, they usually have some sort of crazy like gold or silver metallic coating on the canopy. It's probably super expensive. For some reason, the word iridium comes into my head, but that might actually not be what it is. I don't know. But you'll notice in these pictures that other than the fancy canopy, however, that plane is mostly gray. Therefore, rather than trying to make all of the parts different colors and potentially wasting a lot of time on your vehicle, do some metal bits and maybe some other specific callouts if needed, then just dry brush the edges, which is way faster than edge highlighting on a whole vehicle, I tell you that. But just dry brush the edges with a slightly lighter color than your main color. Try not to get it on the silver, try not to get it on the canopy, but get it onto the, main color in this situation, kind of blue, right? This will also help to pop the details on your vehicle even more, along with the micro shadows, from the previous tip. And then it'll just let the work that the sculptor did, when they sculpted it, it'll let that person save you a bunch of time on your paint job. After you've done that, then if you still want some color variation to your vehicle to add some more kind of visual interest, or maybe you just think that the paint job is going too fast and goodness gracious, you'll have so much time for other things to do, then I'd tell you to maybe paint some of the parts with dark washes to make them look different, but not too different, right? Using transparent paints like washes and speed paints and stuff like that will change the look of some of the parts on your vehicle, but still let the original base color come through, thereby really tying the model all together. It makes more sense in areas where maybe there's like exhaust that comes out of a porch or something like that, or maybe like oil leakage or whatever, stuff like that. And the last thing you should not do too much of, rust effects. Now, if you're painting a vehicle for a post-apocalyptic game, or if you're painting an abandoned vehicle or something like that for a terrain piece, then rust totally makes sense. Knock yourself out, right? Just spend a ton of time on it and just get in there. And you've seen videos about rust effects. They're great. However, military vehicles are rarely rusty. You know what I mean? Like usually they're relatively well maintained, and just as you see fewer and fewer rusty cars on the road these days due to materials science, I assume, then I assume that your sci-fi hover tank is probably made out of more advanced materials than a 2017 Honda, so you don't really need to do rust. However, even hover tanks can get dirty and worn, especially during battle with explosions and mud thrown up in the air and all that kind of stuff. The fastest ways to show this on your vehicles? Stippling with warm-colored speed paints, especially in the lower parts of the models, closer to the ground, those areas. I did a whole video about stipple weathering, pachow, that you can check out, and you probably ought to. And it can be pretty speedy, and it can also be a lot of fun, too. The other way to show wear and tear is with a very, very simple, just silver dry brush on some, but not necessarily all of the edges of your vehicle, right? Especially on the leading edges where it might drive through stuff like foliage and, like buildings perhaps. And we might be staying away from rust with our sci-fi vehicle, but there can still be specks of dirt on your vehicle if you want, rather than using an opaque brown or orange or, brownish orange, right? Paint like we usually do for rust on a piece of sponge, right? You can instead sponge on some darker yet still transparent speed paint and get some visual texture on the vehicle, the speckling and the sponging and all that kind of stuff. Do it on edges and things like that as well, without overdoing the look, because again, it's transparent. When you first sponge it on, it might look too dark, but transparent paints become a bit more transparent as they dry, so just wait a sec. It's not a Golden Demon winning paint job, but it's great for the tabletop, and it took me just over an hour or so, I think. And if I was painting a whole bunch of them, several of them, like a squadron or something, in an assembly line fashion, I could get a whole bunch done pretty quickly. Generally, vehicles, especially military vehicles, are pretty much, again, one color. Look at cars that you see on the street. they'll have like one main color generally, and then maybe some chrome or some black bumpers and stuff like that. Tires don't count, but you know what I'm saying. Not a huge color palette, right? But that does help you to get your vehicles done faster if you let it. Thanks to iDemo Games for sponsoring this video. Their one-page rules-compatible sci-fi miniature line called Revenant's Run is on GameFound right now. They hit their goal in the first 4 hours and 15 minutes or something. But even after the crowdfunding campaign is over, depending on when you watch this video, potentially years from now, you'll still be able to get the STLs and the physical models too from www.idemogames.com. Link in the description below. That's right, I said you can get the STL files for all these models shown in the campaign, and there's a lot more that are on the webpage. Go take a look. So you can print them at home, or you can get many of the available designs printed for you in highly durable industrial-grade resin. You don't even need a printer, right? You can mix and match with your pledge to make the package that's just right for you from the different groups. Maybe you get some STLs, maybe you get some physical stuff, all that kind of stuff. Sci-fi troops, mechs, flyers, vehicles like the one that I painted here in the video and all that kind of stuff, and even terrain you can get in now during the GameFound campaign, and then stretch goals and all that kind of cool stuff. Or if you see this again sometime afterwards, it'll be available at the URL below. Thanks again to iDemo Games and Revenant's Run for sponsoring this video. I hope you learned how to paint your vehicles to a tabletop standard quicker and with less stress. If you liked the video, please hit the like button down below. It really kind of helps get the video out to more people who need to see it. And you either get tiny fireworks or confetti when you do it. There's some discussion back and forth. Which is it? I'm not sure. Let me know what you think they are down in the comments down below. Subscribe to see more, and thanks for watching.